In any Pokemon format, cards that disrupt your opponent are always present. Some are pretty mediocre, but some are just straight up unfair. Looking at you, delinquent. A common trend is that the best disruption cards tend to disrupt your opponent's hand size in some way, while having some use in other situations as well. Cards like Rocket's Admin and N in the past are perfect examples of this. In the current format, cards like Iono and Judge can be used to disrupt your opponent by limiting their hand size, Judge doing so in the early game more so, and Iono more so in the late game. Normally, playing around hand disruption requires a lot of skill and planning, not just in-game but also in building your decks. Decks of the past like Zoroark GX already had built-in draw power to draw out of a late game end to 1. Normally, drawing out of these situations is pretty difficult. Or, hear me out, you can pay $10 and add one card to your deck. Our story starts a few months ago, so let's talk about it. Fezandipiti EX from Shrouded Fable has the ability Flip the Script, which lets you draw 3 cards if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn. We saw this ability on Oricorio GX back in Sun and Moon Cosmic Eclipse. This card saw tons of success, but it really fell out of favor once ADP-zation came to full power. Having a 3 prize liability with low HP on your bench could be a game-losing play due to the prevalence of boss's orders, giving ADP an easy way to bring up your Oricorio and knock it out. It was still used after, but nowhere near as much as Fezandipiti is being used right now. This card is in almost every single deck. There are several reasons as to why it's so good. But before that, I'd please like to ask you guys to subscribe. I work hard on these videos to get them out, so subscribing would mean the world to me. Anyways, one reason is because you only need to play one of them in your deck. This ability to save deck space and play around hand disruption is just unmatched. It isn't even just good at playing around hand disruption. This can be used in every single matchup, and honestly, it is. There's never a matchup where it feels like Fezandipiti is a huge liability. Why play a Pokemon like Bibarel that has an awkward retreat cost and requires an evolution, or Mew which has super low HP, when one Fezandipiti can be your entire draw support engine for Pokemon, letting you play more tech cards and consistency cards than you otherwise would be able to. Very quickly, most decks that used to play Bibarel or other draw support Pokemon like Mew found that one Fezandipiti could not only save on deck space and evolution time, but do almost the exact same thing and sometimes do even better than those other options, while also being less of a liability due to its decent HP and low retreat cost. It's a no-brainer. Another reason Fezandipiti is so good is that hand disruption is so common. Almost every deck plays at least one copy of Iono to have some late game power and turn the tides of a match. Decks like Gardevoir and Palkia often play 4 Iono. Even turbo decks that rely on other supporters play it like Raging Bolt. It's so easy to just bench the Fez with a Nest Ball right before your attack and be basically Iono proof for the next turn. And if your opponent used Boss to knock out Fez, then they can't play Iono, and your attacker is usually safe in that situation. Yes, they could combo an Unfair Stamp plus Boss or Counter Catcher to knock out the Fez and disrupt your hand, but then your attacker is still safe and you get off scot-free. And it's not like Fezandipiti is some huge liability. Like I already said before, it has better HP and perks than Mew EX and Bibarel, and it also can't even get one-shot by attackers like Dragapult EX or Gardevoir EX. So, this is a 210 HP basic Pokemon with an ability that can draw you out of bad hands as soon as your opponent takes a knockout. As I said at the start of the video, hand disruption is in almost every single Pokemon format, but ways to draw out of it that any deck can slap in with basically no cost are rarely ever in a format, and it didn't take long for this card to take over the game. From the day that Fezandipiti released until this very day, it has been a part of almost every single deck that has won a major tournament. It has usage that can only be rivaled by cards like Shaymin EX, Lysander, and Ultra Ball. So, is Fezandipiti EX truly ruining Pokemon? Honestly, I think it could be. It has almost single-handedly killed the idea of disrupting your opponent's hand in a traditional way. It has truly warped the format and the game around itself like many other broken cards of the past have. And I think if Fezandipiti didn't exist, the format would have a much higher skill ceiling, since it will require more effort and planning to win games after a late game Iono. A card that is in 90% of decks that just nullifies some of the most important aspects of the game just ends up making the game feel kind of stale sometimes. In my opinion, cards that have usage as high as Fezandipiti need to be balanced with extreme precaution. Another huge factor for why Fezandipiti is so good is that there's barely any counterplay to it. Yes, you can use boss's orders to knock it out, but then you can't deal damage to the attacker in most situations. The huge problem is that the counterplay to Fezandipiti the very little amount of counterplay that we have can't be used by most decks. The only cards that can truly turn off the ability are Klefki, which does no damage and is almost completely useless when it's not turning off abilities. Iron Thorns EX, which really needs to have the entire deck built around it to be useful, and Fluttermane. But if you're using Fluttermane, you might as well just knock out the Fezandipiti. You know what I mean? You can use Poison to get around the effect of the ability, making it so it has to be knocked out during the turn, since Poison knocks a Pokemon out between turns, but that's not accessible to every deck. Claw of Terapagos is basically the only deck that really uses the poison mechanic in order to take knockouts. So it isn't something that can be used by every deck. This is why something like Path to the Peak would make the format so much better in my opinion. A lot of people hate Path to the Peak, but it would be amazing right now to show off Pokemon like Fezandipiti and Ogerpon and make the format a lot more fresh and enjoyable. It could bring back power to single prize decks that really need something going for them right now, considering that the only playable single prize decks in the game don't usually do great at official tournaments. This might change with the Feraligatr deck looking like a top tier threat in the post-rotation format, but we'll have to wait and see how that stacks up. It reminds me of Shaymin EX in a way, where a card with an insane ability finds its way into almost every deck despite downsides. Shaymin EX only had 110 HP, but a great ability, one of the best of all time, that let you draw until you had 6 cards in your hand. This saw it find play in almost every single deck, even one prize decks like Night March that really didn't like putting 2 prizes into play, because Shaymin was just so good that putting it in play wasn't that big of a deal. Except Fezandipiti doesn't have those downsides that Shaymin does. It's a basic, just like Shaymin, but the pluses of Fezandipiti start with the fact it can just be slapped onto your bench at any time, and can draw you cards when you usually need it the most. Shaymin EX's ability could only be used when you played it down, making it way more inflexible and less versatile in the ways you could use it. Fezandipiti also has 100 more HP than Shaymin and survives most big attacks. Shaymin was so weak it would go down to a Jolteon EX 3 energy flash ray. The retreat costs are the same, and honestly Fezandipiti's attack is much better than Shaymin's too, considering it can be used in any deck to deal decent damage, and could be used as a supplementary attacker for some decks as well. Not to mention there was way more counterplay to Shaymin EX too. Silent Lab, Garbodor, and Alolan Muck could all be used in many decks without being too much of a hindrance to your own, and having some utility in other matchups as well. If things keep going the way they have for the next 2 years, Fezandipiti EX might go down as one of, if not the best support Pokemon of all time. It truly has everything, and it might be ruining the game in front of our very eyes, and we just don't know it. Subscribing will be greatly appreciated. Let me know in the comments what you think of Fezandipiti, and just the general state of Pokemon right now. I'm personally really looking forward to rotation, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Anyways, take care, have a good one, bye.